It's only a little outdated, so it's pretty good.
No,
Good morning.
I
How
thought
are
that
y'all?
was great. Am I on? We also have a cohort in the back of the audience.
Yeah, that's Brian Reinhardt, our dining critic. So you can pepper him with questions too. But so I'm Matt. I live actually in Elmwood, a couple blocks that way, and I am the executive editor for D Magazine now for digital. And we have a really embarrassing example of a deck because I haven't built one of these in 15 years, so I hope you'll bear with me. But if you guys have any questions throughout this, just feel free to ask, and we can kind of have a conversation here. So these covers are the first three. They're a little out of order. Three covers that D Magazine did in 1974. So we are celebrating our 50th anniversary this year, which is pretty nuts for a locally owned publication that focuses on local news and or city magazine, I guess. But so the reason it's called D Magazine is because the Convention Bureau actually had trademarked Dallas Magazine. So, so our founder, Wick Allison, had to come up with something else, and he landed on D. And so in the publisher's note, there's kind of a really interesting reason for that. And he said, in the end, we chose our name simply because we like its style and we like what it says about our city. Dallas is no longer a little d struggling to become a big D, and the city should assume the quiet confidence our single initial implies. It's why we founded this magazine, and it's what we hope the magazine will impart. And so what that means really is politics, news, food, shopping, lifestyle, anything that helps our readers engage with the city was what the magazine was founded on and what we kind of continue to try and do today.
So I think about a year ago, I was involved in a kind of a focus group not related to anything in particular. But it was really interesting to me because a lot of people that were in this group that were all from North Texas, when asked about D Magazine, most of them viewed D as part of this larger, evil media conglomerate landscape. And it was really surprising to me that no one in this particular group understood that D has except for like a brief, year period or something, it has always been a family-owned company and owned by the same family. And after Wick Allison passed, it is now run by his wife, Christina Allison, and his daughter, Jilly Allison.
Yeah, I think we have, 8 people on editorial putting this out,
Yeah.
12 issues a year. But in the years since, I don't even know how to use PowerPoint apparently, but in the years since, the city has changed and we have too. And so we've added a business title called DCEO. That's Philip Hyatt Haig, Elmwood resident right there too. He's the executive director of the Loop, which is building the giant loop trail around Dallas, which is really cool. We've added a home magazine, weddings. We have a daily website that basically focuses on news, food, sports, lifestyle, shopping. We do a lot out of that little office. So I kind of wanted to talk about our 50th. We, since the beginning of the year, have been highlighting some of our best stories, essentially. So we went through the archives, we found, we identified the 50 best, and we've been highlighting them on the site. It's been really neat because D has sort of been there throughout Dallas's development, and a lot of these stories really highlight kind of where we've come from in a lot of ways. This one was written by Blackie Sherrod, who was a longtime Dallas Morning News reporter, I believe, and out in Fort Worth too. But he wrote about the Dallas Dispatch, which was a pretty rowdy newspaper in the early 1900s when Dallas was a 4 or 5 newspaper town. And this guy, a reporter named Jack Proctor, who just basically could not exist today. He would, when there wasn't news, he would make it, he would light cars on fire. Yeah, and it was like right outside the newsroom too, I think. And so, Yeah, and he lied about meeting with Clyde Barrow, Bonnie and Clyde, and the reason they found out was because they got caught while he was allegedly interviewing them. So it's really cool to kind of look back at some of these old Dallas stories that otherwise would have been lost to history, I think.
It's been an interesting journey going back in the archives, and there's so many parts of Dallas history that I forget or never knew, and also as editors, looking back at stories that were of their time and made sense in their time and don't make sense anymore, or are problematic for a variety of reasons now, or have a kernel of information but in a very problematic package. And so having to have a lot of serious talks amongst ourselves about what has lasting meaning or importance and what kind of caveats those have to be couched in. But yeah, and seeing how journalism has changed in 50 years, which is a shocking amount.
Yeah, we actually had to add, we came up with this little disclaimer that we put on the top of stories. Texas Monthly kind of did a similar thing when they celebrated their 50th last year. But the story was first published in a different era. It may contain words or themes that today we find objectionable. We nonetheless have preserved the story in our archive without editing to offer a clear look at this magazine's contribution to the historical record, which is a good way of saying, like, we might use language 50 years ago that we wouldn't today. Oak Cliff is a big part of our story too. We have a kind of a joke in the newsroom that you either live in East Dallas or Oak Cliff. And we got to kind of break out of our little neighborhoods to find stories elsewhere because we're so frequently centered here. You moved here, what,
Matt,
20 years ago?
Yeah, Matt, me, and Brian all call this neck of the woods home. Yeah, I moved here in 2004, and I came from the Midwest and had no idea anything about Dallas. My wife was taking a job with American Airlines at the time, and that's why we moved down here. And my first reaction was, Texas, are you kidding me? And then it was, I do not want to live anywhere in a new build on flat ground, and where are we going to find green trees and hills? And thankfully our lesbian real estate agent brought us directly to Oak Cliff. And we've never left.
Yeah, I mean, I remember coming here in college because I had a friend of mine who became my roommate who grew up over here, and just turning off 30 down Sylvan and the hills and the trees, and he just kind of like transported you into a different place. And so my wife and I bought in 21 on Cascade after living closer to Cathy on Kings Highway, and we love it over here. It's been a really cool experience to learn more about Oak Cliff.
It's also been interesting to me over the years because not being a Dallas native and coming from out of town, and having lived in, we were coming from an urban home. We lived right by downtown Columbus in in just a very urban neighborhood. And when we came and people, it was shocking to me at my first job at the city, how many people were like, Oak Cliff, you bought a house in Oak Cliff? I was like, yeah, I love it.
Well, on that note, we partnered with the Dallas Public Library, an archivist over there who once a month kind of finds a relevant topic and digs through the archives to find photos that kind of illustrate whatever was happening that month. And so just going through some of our Oak Cliff coverage reminded me that last year was the 120th anniversary of the annexation of Oak Cliff, which actually only passed by 18 votes, I think, which is kind of wild to think about. But Brandon, who's the archivist at the library, kind of put this together for us, and I wanted to show you some photos of it. This is further south at Golden Gate Baptist Church, from April of 97, and then back to 72. The 8th Street Cafe back in 1947, I believe this was further east. This is cool. This is when the Trinity River flooded in 1908, and this kind of started the realization that we need to move the Trinity River and create levees that could actually protect the city from flooding, sanitation, digging. The reason I think this stuff is important is partly because nobody else in town is going to kind of do a story like this in the way that we would, because we're kind of freed from being the first draft of history like the Dallas Morning News is. And we really need the Dallas Morning News, but we also need these sort of like, take a step out and actually look at what the history of these neighborhoods were and what they've gone through. There's the Texas Theater back in 1932. Yeah, we've got a few more for you. Another thing we do at the magazine is try to take newsy issues and figure out why they matter and what the rest of the city should take from them. And so, I don't know if you guys were involved in the West Oak Cliff area plan, WOCAP. I know Wax Space had plenty of neighborhood association meetings here, but the way we approached this was looking at Bishop Arts, actually, because Bishop Arts about 10 years ago was rezoned to allow more density, and this was something that the neighborhoods that make up West Oak Cliff were very concerned about, that entire blocks could be mowed down for 3- and 4-story apartment buildings, which actually happened on 8th Street. I don't know if you guys have seen that over there, but and so that's kind of how we approached this, which was what problem is WOCAP really trying to solve, or what level of engagement are the public getting in the sense of like protecting their neighborhood and what they wanted. How do you think we approach stories differently than other outlets in town?
Because we're a magazine, Matt is probably the best reporter on our staff, who has the deepest knowledge of the city and is very attuned to what's happening at City Hall and what's going on around town, and has like a shockingly deep knowledge of city history and city politics and all that kind of thing. But as a magazine, traditionally we are not a news organization, so we are not. We don't view ourselves as being responsible for breaking news every day. Although when it lands in our lap, we do, and that happens a surprising amount of time. Being a monthly, we I think view our mission more in terms of, first of all, we just love great stories. We love any great story. We are story fanatics and have been since the time the magazine started. But so we have the luxury of a little bit more time and a little bit more square footage in terms of word space, so that we can tell a 3,000 word story, a 5,000 word story, a 10,000 word story, which a newspaper or even a weekly like The Observer can't really do. So yeah, and being D, like we're a little quirky and weird and obsessed with crazy things, and so we like to kind of come in things sideways, but usually try and take a deeper but also entertaining and interesting look at things.
This is a pretty good example of that. Do you guys remember 2015 when someone bought a house over near Kings Highway and was doing some renovation work and found concrete in the backyard, and inside that concrete was a corpse?
What every homeowner wants to find.
Yeah. And so that, I believe, was actually a story that we saw in the newspaper. And this is how some of these things work too, where you just kind of make a mental note, like that's really weird that this thing happened. And it turned out that one of our freelancers had actually lived on that block where it was, and the guy who went missing and who was later identified as the victim, he'd had a pretty colorful history with just having lived next to him. And so we were able to take that story, and Brantley used first person to really kind of explain his experience with this person and led up to what happened there. And I'll send you guys these links too. So we do a little bit of true crime.
We do a lot of true crime. Matt, for those of you, hopefully you read Matt's article first, but Matt was the originator of Dr. Death.
Which was a Tim Rogers headline, and I hated it. It was solved by... But I guess if you write a good story, you should make a podcast out of it really quickly, or somebody else will, and then you won't get any money out of it. So you started the magazine in 2016, right? What has kind of looking through the lens of the city magazine taught you about Oak Cliff and Dallas beyond what you just kind of experienced living here?
Why do you have to ask me the hard question?
Because I can't keep a rhythm with all my notes.
It's always, I'm learning every day about the city and the history, and part of it is just overhearing Matt talk and Brian talk and Tim and Zach, and you just pick up so many different pieces from all the different stories everybody's working on. But I think it's part of it too is these stories that join together narratives and make sense of things that seem individual or chaotic or whatever, and that there's a pattern of development, there's a pattern of growth, for better or worse, and there are repeat actors that are showing up in the space and what that means and who to pay attention to.
Yeah, and I mean, that's been really interesting too. Like I was watching Monty Anderson's talk from up here from a few years ago, just about his approach to, he's a developer who, if you didn't know, was responsible for Tyler Station's redevelopment and the Belmont, when the Belmont was actually functioning, and Texas Theater, a few other things. But the idea that you can grow a development with the people who live nearby without mowing it down and selling it off to a third party who's probably not going to have the community involved. And that's been a really interesting thing to follow throughout Oak Cliff.
And one of the things, I mean, this is a little more West Dallas, but I still consider it our backyard. Brian was working on a story about what's going on at Trinity Groves, and I live over here, I drive by these spaces every day, and Brian was noticing that a lot of these spaces were empty over there and was really curious about what was happening and what the next plans were and if this place was going to stay and if it was intending to fulfill its mission as an incubator, and asking all these really insightful questions. And then he was also talking to neighborhood leaders and activists and everything else. And there was a whole bunch, he got into all these promises that were made when that development first went in to the neighborhood that I had no idea about until I read that story. What is that? Is that in our July issue?
July,
yeah, coming out.
I believe. Subscribe now.
Yeah.
What did you call it? Like going to lunch at Trinity Groves was like urban exploring because it was so empty. I'm going to pick on Brian a little bit here too. I got a couple of his stories. So this is another really good example of the stuff that I think we do really well. Brian had been, I think, eating from Oak Cliff bread for years, like back when they were selling out of their home in Oak Cliff. And so when they finally opened here, I think you spent 6 weekends just ordering the entire menu. And wrote this really cool story that's explored how these folks really came to love bread and learn to bake, and how they moved from Austin, right, to Dallas up here and worked at Lucia and learned how to cure meat and incorporated that into the croissants. And so I think the way that we try to approach stories is how much detail can we get in there? Like, what is the really interesting thing that's going to make it sticky for people, that's going to make them really want to go walk up there on a Saturday morning and check it out. Brian profiled a cat as well. This is Leftovers, who hangs out over on 8th Street. But
yeah, we all live in Oak Cliff, and we're all cat people, which is, I don't know if that's coincidence or.
Yeah, mine's trapped in my jail of a house. So the other thing that I think we do really well too, and try to help people with, is service. That's always been sort of a core element of our magazine, which is just telling people like where they should go and spend their money. And so this was kind of a really neat example of how we transformed a really robust print package into something that was super usable online, which was our Best Bars issue. And so you're able to go here and select neighborhoods and different types of bars and things like that. And I think that's a really cool part of the City Magazine experience, that, how can we come up with creative ways to really just show people their city? So how have you approached service? It's really difficult to do the same thing like once every 2 years, 3 years, which is the 50 best restaurants, or best burgers or pizza, or all these things are sort of part and parcel to the City Magazine experience, but get really kind of rote really quickly.
Well, sometimes like at first it seemed like it was going to be a dumb idea. Like during COVID, or right before COVID, we were like, we should do a story about roadhouses. Like that seems fun. It's a little different from bars. It's a little different from restaurants. Like that'll be great. So I was like, perfect. This is going to be easy. And so I Googled Texas roadhouses. Yeah, it's very difficult to Google Texas roadhouses because there is Texas Roadhouse.
It's good SEO.
Yeah. Yeah. And then COVID happened, and so then that went on the back burner, and then we came out of that, and I was like, you know what, everybody wants a little weekend getaway, go for a drive, go see somewhere new, so I was like, oh, this feels like a good idea again. And I think it started with one, which was a roadhouse north of town in a city that no longer exists, because there was a whole issue with there was like a corrupt city official, and they took away. It was outside of Anna. What's the name of the? I'm gonna blank out on all the names. But Spider, a man that's known as Spider, who is an East Dallas native, and he had grown up in going to roadhouses in college and was obsessed with them, and found a couple of friends, and they found a derelict building, and they built this roadhouse, and it was in an old bank that Bonnie and Clyde allegedly once robbed. And turned out that they had one of the best burgers anywhere, and that they had these Wednesday night was live picking. Everybody would come in with their guitars and play guitars, and they would bring in bands, and they had this big space. And so it was just this crazy story that just I was like, and that's the thing about writers, right? We fall in love with our subjects. So he was this incredible guy. Well, then that led me to, there was another woman whose nickname was Spider, who also had a roadhouse a couple hours outside of town. Her nickname came because she rode a Spider motorcycle, I think. And she had this whole crazy story where she had gotten out of a divorce and she couldn't support herself, and she was a single mom, but she had a background, she had a cooking background. And again, she found a derelict building in an old, historic Texas downtown, and she got friends to help her gut it and remodel it, and she turned it into this roadhouse that has steak night every Friday night or something, and it was amazing, which then led to another roadhouse. So yeah, I think we're that's how we approach. It's not just these are the top 5. I mean, sometimes it is, but it's not just these are the top 5 places. We're actually getting to know these people and getting to know their stories, and then and going on these crazy little fun rabbit holes that then hopefully we are bringing readers along with us and exciting them about these things that get us so excited.
Yeah, I think that's the most important part of the writing process, is trying to center it on people, who is at the center of this, who is affected, who is creating, and why should you know about them? And to that point, I was thinking about just some of the Oak Cliff folks that we've profiled and highlighted in the past, and one of those is the late landscape architect Kevin Sloan. I don't know if you guys have heard who he is, but he had a really interesting way of viewing Dallas as a series of creeks and tributaries that really connect to one another. And his vision was, if we figure out how to harness those for development, to connect parks, to connect housing, and what that led to, he was responsible for Vitruvian Park in Addison, which is basically a proof of concept there. But 5 Mile Creek, just a few miles south of us, the Trust for Public Land is really using that ethos to connect these parks through South Oak Cliff along the creek bed. And they've received a lot of federal dollars and things like that, and to help fund it, federal and state. And the kind of core of why they're doing that is this landscape architect who lived, just a few blocks that way. And there's actually going to be a park named after him they're building it on Jefferson and Winnetka right now. So yeah, that's really what we're trying to look for, is who are the people that are making Dallas a better place. That's kind of our mission statement, which we take very, very seriously in that office. But
do people have questions?
Yeah.
it's easier for us to answer questions. Yes?
I got a question. As the landscape of how people take in their media changes, have y'all found that you're able to pivot pretty quickly, or have you had challenges pivoting, or have you found you don't really need to pivot? Like, how's that been for you guys?
We're pivoting every day. It's a huge, media is a huge challenge. We're in a very challenging business that nobody has figured out. And the ground beneath our feet is constantly shifting. The beauty of D is that we are a relatively small organization with a super kind of tight group of very smart editors. And so we have the ability to kind of try new things, and some of which work and many of which don't. But we just started a new pivot, which is our front burner page. If you want to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so Frontburner was the first news blog in Dallas, actually. When Wick Allison walked up to editor Tim Rogers and said, "You start a blog right now," I believe was basically.
And Tim was like, "What's a blog?"
What's a blog? So it became sort of this way of really the editors to kind of talk to each other and figure it out as they went. And that kind of grew into a daily conversation about Dallas, where if there was something interesting that they came across, I think this is a good example. It's from a couple days ago. Yeah, Tim was just driving around and saw a SUV carrying a bag of basketballs, and he put it up, and that's just kind of a quirky thing. And so that's how Frontburner really started, and the ethos of it was, let's talk about the things that we're seeing and the other things that other local media are doing, and it became this kind of hub for people who are really interested in the mechanics of Dallas. And over the years, it sort of became its own news section that we were writing and reporting like really robust stories for, and we realized that that takes a ton of time, and we're not going to stop doing that. But in order to kind of continue to give people a sense of like what's happening in the city, we had to redesign it. And so that kind of went back to Frontburner's origins of a way for you to sit at work and reload it every time your brain wanders.
Part of that concept too is that I think what media is seeing now with AI and what's happening with Meta algorithms and Google algorithms and all that kind of thing is that for a long time early on, media was chasing the views, right? Like that's how you're going to drive ad sales, and that's how you're going to bring in revenue. And you just want, you want these viral posts, and you want lots of people to look at it, and that's going to make you all the money. And turns out that is absolutely not true at all. And so it's kind of coming full circle to this notion that our core audience are people that live in and around this city and that care what's going on in and around this city, and that they want to be knowledgeable and they want to know what's going on. And so we want people who live here that are going to check in with us every day, multiple times a day, at least a couple times a month, because our content is so good and strong and interesting and useful that people are going to come back for it. Because I mean, personally, I've seen it, and I'm sure you guys have too, that with these AI searches, everything, like you end up getting such junk that it becomes more, that I'm sure people find themselves going more and more to the websites that you trust. If you trust the New York Times, you'll go directly to the New York Times as opposed to Googling whatever. If there's another news site that you trust, that's where you're going to go first. And so this redesigning of Frontburner is that notion of just, the site itself is a destination. You're not casting this giant net wide. We know who we want to talk to. We know who's important to us. And so that's what, trying to kind of come back to that.
And also it lets the reader get to know the editors, that we're human beings who have our own unique thoughts and ways in which we write and supply information, and that's something that AI will never be able to replace. And so that idea was really kind of part and parcel to it too.
I saw there was another hand in the back.
Yeah, you said you had articles in your archive that you said you really couldn't publish these days. Are there any articles, to your mind, that you feel could have just pulled out of yesterday's headline? Like something that really stood out to you as like, wow, we haven't changed in 50 years?
I think a lot of them, honestly. The vast majority of the ones that we picked really do fit that bill. I think we only had to pull about 5 from the ones that we selected. But yeah, like most of these, so this one's really cool. We were, in the 80s, Dallas was home to the world's most prolific counterfeiter. And he got caught and wrote an essay for us about how he did it. And so, so it's like a really, like coming across this, I was like, why would you tell on yourself like this? And then you get to the end and he got arrested and was actually released. But yeah, I mean, this is a really good example of a great magazine story that's told in first person about a topic that's totally fascinating that you would have no idea about unless this guy said, here's how I, counterfeited tens of millions of dollars over, 15 years. But yeah, I mean, just going through these, I mean, this Billy Bob story is really cool. It's not a Dallas story, but it's Dallas adjacent. The writer went undercover as she got a job as a waitress, and then worked for 7 weeks and wrote this story about what it's like to be working at the world's largest honky-tonk at the first year that it was open. So she's, trying to watch ZZ Top and Willie Nelson and just all these people and serve the drunks. And it's just this really super colorful story that I think, ethically it's a little issue because she didn't really say that she was a reporter, but I think other than that, we would have ran it. But
Actually, that's a good example right there. Why is Dallas architecture so bad? That a lot of the issues he talks about specifically, not just the judgment, but the actual issues of arguments and zoning problems and stuff, that's still, a lot of it is still unresolved. And I was reading it just as a curious reader, and I thought, oh my God, this is just like it's yesterday. It's all the same argument. Yeah.
yeah, one of the things you realize about this city is that it doesn't tend to learn very much over the course of its existence. And so you can, I mean, this, to Brian's point, this was written in 1980. And he's essentially saying why, or how developers are building to get the most amount of leasable square footage as possible. And it just makes walking downtown a nightmare. And so I have a kind of a pet project called Dallas Hates Pedestrians, where I walk around and get mad at construction and other detritus that blocks the sidewalk and take a picture of it and be snarky for a paragraph. But I mean, that is very much in line with what this story was talking about 40 years ago.
I'm just kind of curious, can you talk more about, you said most of the editors on staff live in Oak Cliff or East Dallas, and those have some pretty weird parallels. I'm interested in hearing both of you talk about, you talked about why you live in Oak Cliff, but what's the draw of, speaking of bad architecture, and speaking of bad city planning things, why are you in these very, I don't know, why are you drawn to these neighborhoods, I guess? I just want to hear a little bit about that.
Because smart people live in those neighborhoods. Sorry.
And diverse people and small businesses and the little things that really make a city a city. I love Dallas, but I think one of Dallas's greatest drawbacks is just how beige a lot of it is in terms of, once the money gets involved, the interesting stuff goes away. And I think Oak Cliff is a really good example of where these, I hate the word unique, but these really good, unique concepts that really provide a sense of place that you can't find anywhere else.
Yeah, I was interested how the shift has been from print to digital because, I mean, I see your magazines when I check out at the grocery store, but I don't feel compelled that much anymore to actually have a paper copy of something. So I was wondering how important that actually still is. My assumption is it's mostly digital, but if you could talk a little bit about that.
I wish it was mostly digital. It would be so much more sustainable. This is a challenge that we've faced. I mean, I've been in this role as basically web editor since 2017, and we had a kind of a bifurcated editorial team where print was print and they would contribute from time to time, and online was online and we would contribute over there from time to time. And I think this is strictly from editorial. I'll talk about the business side here in a second. But I think for our editorial success, bringing those teams together to look at this as one product is going to be incredibly important for our ability to do great work across these platforms. And we're getting there. From the business side, it's been very difficult to monetize digital because of Facebook and Google eating up the advertising that we would have gone after. And this isn't a D Magazine problem. This is a local journalism problem. And we have not really found a way to create a sustainable revenue source out of the website. And what we're realizing is the path forward is going to be, to your point, creating a way for our readers to give us money, basically. You know, what is that a paywall? Is that events? Is that e-commerce? Basically ways that we can eliminate, not eliminate, but not rely so heavily on advertising, because, you know, we are susceptible to market pressures. We're susceptible to big tech coming in. Facebook, if you want to reach, I don't know, people who are 25 to 34 living in the 75201 zip code, and you want 10,000 of them, you can pay for that and they will deliver it directly to you, versus, hey, D Magazine is great, we love you, but we are going to get more bang for our buck over there.
Which you won't.
You won't.
But yeah, but that's the challenge. People have been trained and expect to get digital for free. And so, yeah, so it's a constant kind of still pivoting and trying to figure out what the optimal model is. One of the things that D is doing more of, and I think is one of our strengths, are events and bringing people together, because we just have such a deep network of people and influential people and interesting people and talented people. And so being able to connect readers to those experiences and places and smart people around town. So that's another way to kind of try and pull readers in. But yeah, the print digital is a constant struggle. So buy a subscription even if you don't want the print magazine. Well, you can come online or pay for events or whatever that is. But it's important to support local journalism, because it really is, you know, it's a tough business to be in.
We'll give you our addresses and you can drop the magazines
Yeah.
off, and we'll recycle
And we'll
them.
recycle them, yeah.
Whatever you need. But yeah, it's a challenge. And also, I mean, the people who are coming to the events and the people who are coming to our website 4, 5, 6 times a month are super engaged, really curious people who are invested in the future of the city. And so getting them in a physical space together is really awesome to see.
But I will also say there's a value. I mean, and I was looking at the beautiful newsstand and periodicals that you've got over here. That I'm, as an old school print editor, I do think that there is something beautiful about a curated, finite piece of content, where everything in it has to matter and isn't this infinite thing that doesn't have to be so carefully culled down. So I do like that.
It is just a beautiful product. I mean, it's really cool to sit there and actually engage with a story for half an hour or however long. Because I don't know if you're like me, but I have like 4 times that many tabs open behind this. It's a terror. But yeah. What's up?
I have been working in South Dallas Fair Park in Southern Dallas for the last 8 years, and as I was born in Dallas, my mom was born in Dallas, her dad was born in Dallas. So the history has been so amazing and so important, because we're so racially divided by design. And so it's been a wonderful excuse to learn from people also born and raised in a very different part of town, very different experiences than my own. And I'm curious, and I'm sorry if I've missed it, because I do subscribe, because a friend of mine has written for y'all in the past, and it's just a way to support her. And my mother-in-law loves it. But have you done a story like on Juanita Craft and the Craft Kids?
Yeah, we have. So last year, so this is a good example of the way that we kind of approach print and online and how they talk to each other. So when the Juanita Craft House reopened, that's a super timely story, right? Like we wanted that to be front of mind while, the press conferences were happening and people's attention were on it. And so the magazine has like a 6-week lead time. So what are you already producing? August, September?
August.
So
Both.
that means that's not getting in the reader's hands for 3 months. And so that's where online really comes into play. And so Catherine Winlett, one of our former editors, went and wrote about not only the restoration of the home, but the history of the home and the Craft kids. And for those who don't know, Juanita Craft, who was integral in the Dallas civil rights movement, served on the city council. But one of her big passions was working with kids, and she called them the Craft kids, basically. And there's still a woman who actually that leads kind of the tours and takes care of the house. She was one of those. And so for print, we profiled her. So that was a good example of being, really in the moment, but then taking a step back and going, how can we give this the print treatment and introduce people to somebody who's really an important part of that project. But yeah, it was super cool to see
So
that.
do y'all see is it part of the mission though to help us grow together and care about our whole city? And so I just don't know if there have been other highlights of like homegrown people from South and Southern Dallas that are doing wonderful work.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so the other challenge for us too is like, how do we get that content in front of you? And it's an interesting challenge too, because we don't just focus on Oak Cliff and East Dallas. We just happen to live in those neighborhoods. We've done stories about why the city is so segregated. One of our big stories from 3-4 years ago was really examining how the State Fair and the city of Dallas colluded to take the homes of black residents near Fair Park and pave over them literally with parking lots, and how that really damaged this part of our city. And then just a few blocks east, you have Interstate 30, which literally cut South Dallas from East Dallas. And one side of the city grew economically and the other did not. So what are ways that our elected officials and residents in those communities are trying to find ways to lift those neighborhoods up? That's something that we really focus on quite a bit.
And a big part of that story was tracking down the actual families, the families that had lived there and then had to move, and then families that had managed to stay over all that time, and actually talking to those people.